The alien research ship Orivax moved quietly above the blue and white world called Earth, its huge silver hull shining against the darkness of space. The ship was home to the brightest minds of the Vlar Empire. Beings who had studied life across hundreds of worlds, they believed they had seen every kind of biology the galaxy could offer. From crystal-skinned creatures that drank starlight to gas-breathing worms that lived in the storms of giant planets. But now they had found something that made even their vast knowledge feel small and uncertain. They had found humans. In the main observation room, dozens of Vlar scientists floated in the gentle pull of artificial gravity, their long, thin bodies wrapped in silver research robes, their large black eyes fixed on the glowing screens in front of them. The screens showed living scans of human bodies taken from far away, the strange shapes of muscles, the fast-beating hearts, the constant electric activity inside the heads of these creatures. All of it was fascinating and confusing at the same time. Commander Thivik stood at the center of the room, his scaled hands folded behind his back, his face calm, but his voice sharp as he spoke to the others. He pointed at a scan that showed the human nervous system lighting up like a storm, explaining that it made no sense for such a small creature to have such a complex and dangerous system inside it. His tone grew heavier when he said that the pain patterns were unlike anything they had ever seen. The body did not shut down under pain. Instead, it kept fighting, as if the discomfort was fuel for survival. Some scientists murmured in disbelief. Others leaned closer to screens. One of them whispered that the heart of a human ran on a strange pump system that kept pressure moving through the whole body, and the brain ran on electric storms that never stopped even in sleep. They all agreed that there was something here they did not understand, and that made them uneasy because the Vlar Empire always understood. In the far corner, researcher Ivor tapped his long fingers on a control panel, bringing up data from past missions. He compared human scans to those of the strongest predators known, to the hardest survivors in the harshest worlds. But every comparison failed. Humans were not the fastest, not the strongest, not the biggest. Yet their systems were built to last through things that would destroy others in moments. Ivor spoke softly, but everyone could hear his words. These creatures are wrong by every rule we know, and yet they live. The more they studied, the more the questions grew, and the more the room filled with a quiet tension, the kind that happens when a truth begins to form, but no one wants to speak it aloud. Commander Thivik finally broke the silence, saying they could not trust remote scans alone. They needed to see a human up close, study one directly, understand how this strange biology worked before it became a problem for the Empire. Orders were sent through the ship. Preparations began for a contact mission. A human would be brought aboard, treated with respect, but studied carefully. Every test would be run, every answer found, or so they thought. None of them expected that the human would change more than their data. None of them expected that the human would change them. While the ship adjusted its orbit, the scientists continued to watch the planet below, its lands and seas turning slowly under them. They saw flashes of light from cities, movement of ships in the oceans, signs of life everywhere. And yet they knew so little about what it meant to be one of those creatures, their culture, their history, their strengths and weaknesses. It was all a mystery wrapped in flesh and bone. Commander Thivik felt something he rarely felt, a thin thread of caution in his thoughts. In all his years leading research missions, he had always been sure that knowledge gave them power. But now he wondered if knowing too much about these humans might lead to something else, something dangerous. He did not voice this to his team. Instead, he told them to prepare the medical chambers, to calibrate the scanners, to ready the containment field just in case. Down in the docking bay, a small landing craft was prepared, its silver frame gleaming under the lights. 2 Vlar pilots moved through the checklist while a team of 3 researchers loaded equipment. The mood was not like other missions. Usually there was excitement when meeting a new species, but now there was a quiet edge in every movement, as if the ship itself sensed that this meeting would not be like the others. On Earth, far below, the Human Space Agency had received the signal, a message written in simple code, requesting peaceful contact and a scientific exchange. At first the humans were cautious, then curious, and finally they agreed they would send one of their own to the alien ship for study. The decision was quick because humanity had long wanted proof that it was not alone, and now that proof was here, waiting above them in the stars. The Vlar Council on the Aurivax reviewed the human choice, a captain from the Earth Space Navy named Mara Dalton. Her record showed years of service in dangerous missions, survival in hostile environments, and an ability to remain calm under pressure. To the Vlar, this was perfect. They believe a trained subject would give them clearer results. They did not realize they had just invited a living example of the very thing they could not understand. As the hours passed, the Aurivax held its position in silent orbit, its silver body reflecting the sunlight. The research team double-checked every instrument, every safety field, every camera and sensor. They wanted no mistakes. They believed they were ready. Yet an unspoken question hung in the air like a shadow. What if the scans were not wrong? What if human biology truly broke the rules? In the observation room, the main screen shifted to show the landing craft descending through the clouds, the blue and white world rushing up to meet it. The scientists watched in silence, each lost in thought, some imagining the moment they would first touch a human, others thinking of the data they would collect, and a few wondering if they had made a mistake they could not undo. Commander Thivik stood at the center, his black eyes never leaving the screen. His voice was calm, but carried an edge as he said to no one in particular, "We are about to meet the strangest life form in the galaxy, and we do not yet know if that is a gift or a threat." Around him, the other scientists nodded slowly, the hum of the ship filling the silence. Outside, the stars waited, cold and endless, and somewhere far below, a human was preparing to step into the unknown. The landing craft touched down on a wide metal platform deep inside the human spaceport, its silver wings folding in as the hatch slid open with a slow hiss. From inside stepped two tall Vlar pilots, their long frames bending slightly under the brighter human lights. Behind them floated a sealed container holding the tools for the journey back. On the other side of the platform waited Captain Mara Dalton, her figure straight and steady, her dark hair tied back, her eyes sharp with a mix of caution and curiosity. She had seen strange worlds before, but never creatures like these. The Vlar moved forward in a smooth, almost gliding motion, their black eyes locking on the human as they approached. They offered a gesture of greeting, a slow raising of one hand with fingers spread wide. Mara nodded in return, her voice calm, as she said she was ready for the mission. She carried no weapon, only a small bag with basic items. The air between them was tense yet respectful. Two worlds meeting for the first time in a place built for machines and steel. One of the Vlar scientists, researcher Ivor, stepped closer and scanned Mara with a small glowing device. Streams of light moved over her body, gathering basic readings. The numbers made him pause for a fraction of breath. Her resting heart rate was faster than most Vlar, even under stress, yet her breathing was smooth and steady. Her muscle density was above their expected range for a creature of her size. He said nothing, choosing to save the details for the report. They guided her into the craft. The inside was filled with a faint hum from the engines. The seats were shaped for alien bodies, but had been adjusted for her. Straps crossed over her chest and legs as the craft lifted from the platform. Mara looked out through the side window and saw Earth shrinking below, clouds curling like white rivers, the blue fading into black as the stars opened above her. She felt no fear, only the weight of the unknown ahead. The Aurivax grew larger in the view, its silver skin reflecting the light of the sun, its many sections connected like a chain of smooth ovals. When the craft docked, the hatch opened to a wide corridor lined with pale, glowing panels. The air smelled faintly of metal and something like rain. Mara stepped out with slow, measured steps, her eyes scanning everything. She could feel the gaze of unseen watchers from behind the walls. The ship seemed alive with quiet energy. Commander Thivik waited at the end of the corridor, taller than the others, his scales carrying a faint golden shimmer under the lights. His voice was deep, but even as he welcomed her, saying she would be treated with care during the studies, Mara replied that she understood, her words steady, but inside her mind she kept a sharp awareness of her surroundings, years of training making her note exits, patterns in movement, and the position of every figure in sight. They led her to the medical chamber, A wide circular room filled with floating screens and machines that hummed softly. In the center was a platform surrounded by a ring of delicate arms ending in sensors. The scientists moved around her in slow, careful arcs, speaking in their language that the translator in her ear turned into smooth words. They asked her to stand still while they began a full scan. Beams of soft light washed over her, capturing images of bone, muscle, and blood flow. As the scans built their data, whispers began to spread between the researchers. They were seeing things that did not match their expectations. Small fibers in her muscles showing signs of micro-damage from past strain, yet already repaired without external aid. Nerve signals running at speeds far beyond their norms. An immune system that seemed ready to attack threats before they even reached full strength. Each detail added to the puzzle, and the unease in the room grew. One young scientist approached with a small clear sphere in his hand. Inside was a shifting mist of blue particles. He explained that it was a harmless probe designed to test reaction to foreign substances. Mara agreed to the test. The sphere dissolved into a fine vapor around her face. She breathed it in. The sensors lit up instantly. Her body recognized the foreign element and began to react. But instead of collapsing or showing distress, her system adapted in seconds, neutralizing the particles without slowing her heart or breath. The scientists stepped back, their eyes wide. This was not defense as they knew it. This was something else, a readiness built into the core of her being. Commander Thivik moved closer, studying the readings with silent focus. He asked her if she felt any change. Mara shook her head and said it felt like nothing happened, her tone almost casual. This made the tension in the room heavier. Next came a physical test. They asked her to grip a set of padded bars connected to the wall. As she held them, a force tried to pull them from her hands. The power increased slowly. Her muscles tensed, but she did not let go. The force doubled, tripled. Still she held on, her arms trembling but not breaking. The machine stopped at the highest level it could reach. The reading showed strength far above their estimates, not from size, but from some deeper reserve of energy. While most subjects from other species would rest after such effort, Mara stood ready for the next test, her breathing already back to normal. The recovery speed alone made the researchers exchange quick glances. Ivor leaned toward Thivik and spoke in a low voice. This is not normal adaptation. This is something designed for survival in chaos. The commander gave no reply, his eyes never leaving the human in the center of the room. The session ended with a request for a simple endurance measure. They had her walk on a moving platform set to simulate different terrains, shifting from smooth ground to uneven rock to steep incline. Minutes passed, then more, yet her pace did not falter. Sweat formed on her skin, but her steps stayed steady. The reading showed her body adjusting its energy use in real time, shifting from quick bursts to slow, sustained effort without pause. When the test was complete, Mara sat on the edge of the platform, drinking water and glancing at the scientist who stood in a silent half-circle. She could feel their eyes on her not just with curiosity, but with a quiet unease, as if they had stepped into something bigger than their plans. One of them finally spoke, asking how humans dealt with exhaustion. She smiled faintly and said, "We keep going until the job is done." The translator carried her words across the room, and the silence that followed was heavy. Commander Thivik dismissed the team for the day, telling Mara she would be given quarters to rest, but as the others left, he remained standing by the platform, his gaze thoughtful. When she asked if something was wrong, he answered that they had much to learn and perhaps not enough time to learn it. His voice was low, almost to himself. Mara watched him for a moment, then followed the guide to her quarters. The corridor ahead, glowing with soft light, the hum of the ship following her every step. Somewhere deep inside the Oravax, the questions about human biology were beginning to turn into something more than curiosity. The lights in the medical chamber dimmed as Mara returned the next cycle. The air felt cooler, and the soft hum of the ship was sharper in her ears. Commander Thivik stood near the central platform, speaking with his team in low voices. The moment she entered, their eyes turned to her, some with open curiosity and others with the kind of focus one might give a dangerous tool. Thivik greeted her and explained that today's study would involve environmental stress. His words were polite, but his tone carried a quiet weight. This was not a simple check of numbers. This was a measure of limits. They led her to a circular chamber with walls of polished black metal. The floor was smooth and cold under her boots. Vents along the ceiling released a faint mist that drifted like smoke. One of the scientists activated the first setting, and the pull of gravity faded. Mara felt herself lift from the ground, her hair rising slightly. The sensation was strange but not alarming. She had trained in low gravity before. She steadied herself with slow movements, drifting in the center while scanners circled her. Then the temperature began to drop. At first it was like a cool morning, then like a winter wind. Her breath came out in pale clouds. Her fingers stiffened. The alien observers noted the readings, their voices soft as they remarked on her core temperature, expecting it to fall fast. But the numbers showed something else. Her muscles had begun to generate heat, tiny shivers running through her frame, her body refusing to allow the cold to take control. The chill grew harsher, frost forming along the walls. Mara's breath quickened, but she kept moving her limbs, flexing her hands, keeping the blood warm. She glanced at the observation window and saw the silhouettes of the Vlar, their black eyes unblinking. She smiled at them through the glass, a small defiance that made several shift uneasily. One whispered to another that no one from their worlds could remain active at this cold without aid. Gravity returned slowly and the air warmed again. The mist faded, the chamber floor solid under her boots once more. The scientists entered to take quick readings, touching her arms and shoulders with scanning rods. The results showed her heart steady, her breathing already normal, recovery complete within moments. Ivor's voice trembled slightly as he spoke to Thivik, saying that her biology adapted to the cold in real time, creating heat instead of losing it. Thivik only nodded and ordered the next phase. She was moved to another chamber, this one shaped like an oval arena, the floor covered in smooth plates that shifted under her feet, creating unstable ground. A set of thin metallic drones hovered above, each carrying a device that could deliver controlled electric shocks. The translator in her ear carried the instruction. She was to remain standing while the drones attempted to knock her down with pulses of energy. She raised an eyebrow, but stepped into the center without hesitation. The first pulse hit her shoulder, a quick sharp pain like touching live wire. Her muscles tightened and her teeth clenched, but she stayed upright. The second pulse hit her leg. Stronger, she stumbled but caught herself. The drones adjusted their aim, increasing the power. The pulses came faster, pain blooming across her body in hot flashes. Yet something strange began to happen. The readings showed her nerve system adjusting, her pain threshold climbing, the same shocks that had caused her muscles to lock now made her only flinch, her mind and body treating the pain as something familiar, almost expected. The lead scientist muttered in disbelief, saying that repeated pain should cause weakness. Yet here it was causing resistance. The more they pushed, the less effect it had. Finally, the drones hit her with their highest setting, the energy surging through her frame. Her knees bent under the force, but she straightened again, breathing hard but still standing. She looked up at the observation window and said in a steady voice that they would have to do better if they wanted her down. The drones powered off and drifted back. The floor plates stilled, and the scientists entered again to take more readings, their black eyes moving quickly between the monitors and the human in front of them. Her skin showed no burns. Her pulse was steady. Her muscles showed signs of increased readiness rather than strain. Thivik stepped forward, studying her with a long, unblinking gaze. He said quietly that she was unlike any life form they had ever measured. Mara only shrugged and said she was just human. They brought her to a smaller chamber for the final trial of the day. In the center was a padded chair, surrounded by metal arms tipped with medical tools. She was asked to sit and offer her arm. The translator assured her it was a minor procedure. She agreed and rolled up her sleeve. One of the arms extended a thin blade, making a small incision in her skin. Bright red blood welled up. Several scientists stepped back in surprise at the vivid color, but they leaned forward again as the bleeding slowed on its own, the edges of the wound drawing closer even before any treatment was given. Ivor recorded every detail, noting that her clotting speed was far beyond any standard in the Empire. The tissue regeneration visible within minutes. No external agents used. No healing chamber required. It was as if her body refused to remain damaged for longer than necessary. Mara flexed her fingers and watched the skin knit together. She smiled faintly and said it tickled. The comment made one of the younger researchers step back in visible discomfort. The chamber doors opened and Thivik called the session to a close. The scientists filed out in silence, their expressions unreadable. Mara followed the guide back toward her quarters, the corridor lights casting long shadows on the walls. She could feel the tension in the air. Not just curiosity now, but something closer to unease, as if the tests had not only given answers but also raised a new kind of question, the kind that whispered about danger. Back in the observation room, Thivik stood alone before the screens, replaying the tests, watching the human adapt, resist, recover, each frame adding to the quiet weight in his mind. He sent a coded message to the Vlar High Council, a report that would take hours to transmit across the deep black of space. His words were simple, but carried a warning. The human body is not what we thought. It is built for chaos, for pain, for survival beyond reason. And if one is like this, what of the rest? Far from the ship, Earth turned slowly in the light of its sun, unaware that in orbit above, an alien empire was beginning to see humanity not as a subject of study, but as a potential force to be feared. And inside her quarters, Mara sat on the edge of the bed, stretching her arm where the wound had been, her mind replaying the tests. She did not know exactly what the Vlar had seen in her, but she could tell by their eyes that whatever it was, it had changed their view of her kind forever. The next cycle began with an unusual change in the ship's schedule. Mara was woken earlier than planned by a soft chime at her door. When it opened, she found researcher Ivor waiting in the corridor, his tall frame slightly bent forward, his voice calm yet faster than before as he asked her to follow him. The walk through the silver-lit halls felt different. There was a quiet urgency in the way the few crew they passed moved aside, their eyes flicking toward her and then away again. They brought her to a chamber smaller than the others, its walls lined with smooth panels that pulsed faintly with light. In the center stood a tall frame holding what looked like a chair crossed with a web of thin metal arms. Commander Thivik was already there, his golden scaled face unreadable as he explained through the translator that today's trial would measure human nerve function under pain. Mara tilted her head slightly and gave a short nod, her voice steady as she said she would take the test. She sat in the frame, straps closing across her chest and arms, not tight enough to restrain, but firm enough to keep her in position. Small sensors were placed along her spine, her neck, and her hands, each glowing with a soft blue light. The scientists moved around her like a slow tide, checking readouts, speaking to each other in quick bursts of their language. The translator in her ear fell silent for a moment as they prepared the first level. A sharp current ran through her arm, sudden and bright like the snap of a live wire. Her fingers clenched and her breath caught. The monitors lit with streams of red and yellow, indicating pain signals firing across her nerves. One of the researchers nodded and increased the level. The second wave came stronger, making her jaw tighten, the lines on the monitor spiking higher. Yet she kept her gaze steady on Thivik, who stood by the control panel, his black eyes fixed on her. The levels rose again, the pulses now running through both arms and into her back. Her muscles tensed but did not lock. She breathed slow and deep, her mind pushing the pain aside. The scientists began to whisper to each other again, noting that her reaction was changing. Her body was not showing signs of overload. Instead, the signals were leveling, as if her nervous system was adjusting to the shocks, adapting to handle them without letting them disrupt her control. One younger researcher leaned closer to the readings and spoke with disbelief, saying that repeated shocks should weaken the subject, not strengthen them. Yet here the human was showing a rising tolerance, the pain becoming less disruptive each time it was applied. Thivik ordered the highest safe level to be engaged. The surge came with enough force to make most living beings collapse. Mara's body jerked once, but then steadied. Her teeth clenched in a grin that carried more defiance than discomfort. She asked if that was all they had. Before anyone could reply, an alarm blared across the chamber, the lights shifting to deep red. A voice over the ship's system called for a medical team to report to the engineering sector. Thivik turned sharply toward the door, two of the researchers following. Mara raised an eyebrow and asked what was happening. Ivor hesitated, then said one of the crew had been injured in an accident. A fall during maintenance had caused deep tissue damage and heavy bleeding. Mara's expression changed. Slightly, the kind of shift that comes when training meets instinct. Without waiting for permission, she unstrapped herself and stepped down from the frame, moving quickly into the corridor. Ivor called after her, but she did not slow, her boots striking the silver floor with firm rhythm. The engineering sector was only a few turns away, and when she reached it the scene was tense. A tall Vlar lay on the floor with one leg twisted at a sharp, unnatural angle, dark blue blood pooling beneath him. The crew around him moved quickly, but their hands were uncertain. One held a device to slow the bleeding, while another tried to stabilize the limb. Mara dropped to one knee beside the injured alien, her hands moving with practiced speed. She asked for the ship's equivalent of a sealing band. When they hesitated, she barked the request again, the tone making them react. She wrapped the band high above the wound to slow the flow, then pressed both hands to the torn tissue, applying steady pressure. Her mind focused on one thing only: keep the being alive. The injured Vlar's eyes were glassy, his breathing shallow. Mara spoke low and steady to him, telling him to hold on, even though she knew he could not understand her words. The tone would carry the meaning. The ship's medical team arrived moments later, bringing advanced tools and sealants. They paused for the briefest second at the sight of a human kneeling in their place, then moved in to complete the work. One of them scanned the readings and saw that Mara's manual pressure had kept the loss far below what it could have been. The alien would survive because she had acted faster than their systems could respond. Ivor, who had followed her, stood to the side watching in silence, something shifting behind his black eyes as he processed what he was seeing. When the injured crew member was taken away, Mara stood and wiped her hands on her trousers, the blue blood leaving faint stains. She looked at Ivor and asked simply if the alien would live. He nodded slowly and said yes. She gave a short nod in return and walked back toward the corridor, her step steady, but her pulse still high from the surge of action. Behind her, the crew members whispered to each other, their words carrying a mix of surprise and something close to respect. Later that cycle, back in the observation room, Thivik reviewed the recording from the engineering sector, frame by frame, watching the human move without hesitation into danger, applying simple methods with immediate effect. He saw how her body language never wavered despite the smell of alien blood and the sight of broken bone, how her own adrenaline had not shaken her control. He spoke quietly to Ivor, who stood beside him, saying that the human's ability to endure pain was one thing, but her ability to act through it was another, something far more dangerous in its potential. Mara returned to her quarters without being stopped for further tests that day. The hum of the ship seemed quieter than before, as if the Aurivax itself was considering what had happened. She sat on the bed and flexed her hands, feeling the faint ache in her muscles from the earlier trial. She knew the aliens had seen more than they planned. They had seen that human biology was not only about surviving damage. It was about moving forward through it, about acting when others would stop. She smiled faintly at the thought, not as a boast, but as a private truth. And somewhere in the corridors outside, the crew whispered that the human was not to be underestimated. The next cycle on the Aurivax began with a sense of quiet tension running through the ship. Word of what had happened in the engineering sector had spread far beyond the research team. Some of the crew avoided looking at Mara when she passed, while others stared openly, as if trying to see what made her different. Commander Thivik called for a control trial that would test the limits of her recovery. He gave the order with a voice that carried no emotion, yet his eyes watched her closely, as if expecting the results to challenge more than their science. They led her into the medical hall, a long white chamber lined with shelves of instruments and glowing panels. In the center stood a table made of smooth alloy. Beside it floated several scanning arms, each ending in delicate tools. The translator in her ear relayed the explanation. They wanted to observe human tissue repair in real time. Mara listened without comment and removed her jacket, placing it neatly on a nearby bench, her expression calm and unreadable. She lay on the table as the scanners moved into position above her. The research team gathered in a half circle, Ivor held a small sterile blade between his long fingers, the edge shimmering faintly under the lights. He explained that the cut would be shallow and controlled, meant only to open the skin for observation. Mara nodded once and extended her forearm. Her muscles relaxed, though her mind remained alert. The blade touched her skin and drew a thin line of red, the blood bright and vivid, against the pale surface of the table. Several of the Vlar stepped back at the sight, their black eyes wide. The color was unlike their own deep blue fluid. It looked almost alive in the way it flowed. The scanners recorded every movement of the cells, the clotting beginning within moments, the tissue around the wound pulling together with visible speed. The researchers exchanged quick words in their own language. The translators stayed silent, as if unable to keep pace with the rapid discussion. Mara simply watched them from where she lay. Minutes passed, and the bleeding slowed to a faint trace, the wound edges drawing closer without any sealant or aid. The scanner screens showed the formation of new tissue, the repair so fast it disrupted the prediction models. Ivor leaned in closer to study the data, his fingers moving over the panel as if trying to find an error. Yet the numbers stayed consistent. Thivik ordered a second cut, slightly deeper, to see if the effect was the same. Mara agreed without hesitation, her voice steady. The blade traced another line across her arm, this one darker and longer. Yet the result was the same. The blood slowed, the flesh began to knit together in minutes. The murmurs grew louder among the team, the younger researchers stepping back with visible unease. It was one thing to read about rapid healing, but another to watch it happen before their eyes. One of them whispered that such a system could make a soldier nearly impossible to stop. Another replied that it could make an enemy terrifying. Mara heard the words through the translator and allowed a faint smile to touch her lips, though she said nothing. Thivik then gave an unexpected order. He asked Mara if she would allow a more significant injury, one that would take longer to heal, purely for study. Mara looked at him for a moment, her gaze meeting his without blinking. Then she said that if it was for science, she would allow it, but only if she could control how it was done. Thivik agreed after a brief pause, and Mara reached for the blade herself. The researcher stiffened as she made a clean cut across the palm of her hand, deeper than either of the previous wounds, the red spilling freely for several seconds before she closed her fingers into a fist. The scanners focused on the hand, recording every reaction. The blood flow slowed faster than expected, the wound edges already tightening, strands of tissue pulling across the gap. The data showed accelerated cell division far beyond their known limits. Ivor's voice was low as he said that no known species could repair at this speed without artificial aid. Thivik remained silent, his eyes fixed on the human hand as the cut sealed itself into a thin line within less than an hour. And even that faint mark began to fade. By the end of the session, there was nothing left but clean skin, no scar, no trace. The only proof of the wound was the record in their systems. The researchers stepped back in a kind of shared disbelief. The room felt heavier now, as if the air itself carried the weight of what they had just seen. Mara arose from the table and pulled her jacket back on, her movements calm and measured. She thanked them for their care in the procedure, her tone polite, but carrying a quiet edge that none of them missed. Later in the observation room, Thivik reviewed the footage in silence. Each moment of the healing replayed again and again. The speed was not just rapid, it was adaptive, faster with each injury, as if the body learned and improved from every test. Ivor stood beside him and said that this kind of system was not just a survival tool. It was a weapon built into the very fabric of the being. Thivik replied that if such a trait was common among humans, then the balance of power in the galaxy was not what the Vlar had believed. Across the ship, whispers grew louder, crew members passing the story from one to another. The human could heal faster than wounds could last. Some added details that were not true, saying she could close a cut in seconds or survive wounds that would end any Vlar. The truth was already powerful enough, but the stories gave a life of its own. Even those who had not seen the test began to look at Mara with a mix of respect and wariness. In her quarters, Mara sat alone for a time, flexing her hand where the deep cut had been. She thought about the way they had watched her, The way their voices had changed when they saw the blood stop and the skin close. She knew they had come looking for knowledge, but she could see in their eyes that knowledge was not all they had found. They had found fear. Not the wild kind, but the quiet, steady kind that grows when you realize your understanding of the world has been wrong in ways you never imagined. Somewhere in the command sector, Thivik prepared another report for the High Council. This one shorter, but more direct. His words were simple. The human body recovers from injury with a speed and completeness beyond anything in our records. The effect increases with repeated damage. Caution is advised. The message was sent into the void of space, carrying with it the truth of what they had learned. And in the silent corridors of the Auravax, the thought lingered that they were hosting not just a guest, but a living example of something that could one day stand against them. The message Thivik sent to the High Council traveled through encrypted channels and reached the Vlar homeworld in less than 2 cycles. In the great chamber of the council, the elder voices gathered, their tall figures cloaked in deep gray robes that shimmered faintly in the artificial light. Each of them read the report in silence, and the air grew heavier with each line. The human on the Auravax could heal faster than any known species, and with each wound her speed of recovery increased. The words were not written in alarm, yet the meaning could not be ignored. This was not just a scientific curiosity. It was a trait that could shift the balance of power in ways no one had prepared for. One elder leaned forward, his long fingers pressed together, and said that the humans had always been a distant rumor in their records, a species from the spiral arm that had barely touched the great routes of trade and war. They were supposed to be primitive in their ways of travel. Yet here was proof that their bodies carried something far more advanced than many civilizations that ruled whole sectors. Another elder replied that such healing meant they could survive conditions that would cripple entire armies, survive wounds that would keep most soldiers from the field, survive even when the enemy believed them destroyed. The chamber filled with low murmurs as the counselors weighed the implications. On the Auravax, Mara had no knowledge of the council's debates, but she felt the change in the air around her. Crew members who once spoke freely now kept their distance, their conversations stopping when she entered a room. Some looked at her as if she was a rare artifact, others as if she was a weapon ready to be drawn. Even Ivor, who had once spoken to her with an almost warm curiosity, now kept his words brief, his eyes measuring her every response. It was not hostility, but it was no longer the open welcome she had first received. Thivik summoned her to his private chamber. The walls of the space lined with star maps and old banners from the Vlar Wars. His posture was formal, his voice calm. He said that the council had taken great interest in her biology and that new tests would be conducted. These tests would be far more complex and would require her cooperation over the next several cycles. Mara listened without interruption, her expression giving nothing away. She asked if these tests would harm her. Thivik hesitated a moment before saying that they were not designed to cause permanent injury, but the limits of her healing would be examined in more demanding ways. She nodded slowly and said that she would take part, so long as she was free to leave after the trials were done. The first of these new trials took place in a controlled simulation chamber, a vast hollow dome where the floor could shift into any terrain. The air could be altered in temperature and composition. Mara was placed in an environment that mimicked the thin atmosphere of a high mountain world. The Vlar scientists expected her to tire quickly as her body adjusted to the lower oxygen. Yet instead, they watched her recover faster than their models predicted. Her breathing steadied, her movements grew easier, and within an hour, she moved as if the air was no different from the ship's. In the second trial, they exposed her to controlled heat far above safe limits for their own kind. Their sensors tracked her temperature rising, her skin showing signs of strain. Yet again her body adapted, the signs of heat stress fading as her system adjusted. The scientists exchanged uneasy glances, their notes filling with data that seemed to defy the limits of known biology. One whispered that this was not mere healing, but a kind of living evolution happening in moments instead of generations. The most unsettling trial came when they simulated blunt force trauma using kinetic projectors. They struck her with impacts that would have broken the limbs of a Vlar soldier. Mara staggered, but remained upright. Pain crossed her face, yet she pushed forward. The scanners showed her bones knitting in real time. The microfracture sealing before the test even ended. One researcher stepped back from the console in disbelief and muttered that no armor could give that level of protection. The armor was in her very body. When the trials ended, Mara returned to her quarters, the muscles in her arms and legs still aching, but already easing with each passing moment. She knew now, without doubt, that they feared her. The looks in their eyes were not only curiosity, but calculation, the kind that leaders and warriors have when they see something that could change the nature of war. She had seen that look before among humans, and she knew that fear often led to action meant to control what could not be understood. On the homeworld, the Council decided to send a special envoy to the Oravax, a figure known for delicate negotiations, but also for ensuring that potential threats never left Vlar space unchecked. The envoy traveled with a guard detail disguised as attendants, their orders kept sealed until they arrived. Thivik received the notice and read it twice, his jaw tightening. He sent no reply other than an acknowledgement. Then he called Ivor to his chamber and spoke in low tones about the importance of keeping the human calm until the envoy arrived. Mara, meanwhile, began to notice subtle changes in her daily life. The corridor she walked now had security drones hovering nearby. Her access to certain areas of the ship was restricted without explanation. Even her meals were delivered instead of taken in the shared hall. It was a slow tightening of the world around her, each small shift easy to ignore on its own, but together forming a pattern that was impossible to miss. She said nothing, but in the quiet of her room, she began to plan. Because humans did not wait for danger to arrive without preparing to meet it. When the envoy's ship docked with the Oravax, the atmosphere shifted again, the crew moving with careful precision. The figure that stepped aboard was tall even for a Vlar, their robe a deep silver that caught the light in sharp edges, their voice soft yet carrying weight as they greeted Thivik and asked to meet the human at once. Mara was brought to the command hall where the envoy waited, their black eyes studying her in a long silence before they spoke, saying that her presence in Vlar space was both an honor and a concern. She replied that she understood the concern but had no wish to bring harm. The envoy smiled faintly and said that understanding would be tested in the cycles to come. As they spoke, the guards positioned themselves at quiet points around the room, their hands resting lightly near the grips of their sidearms. Mara noticed every movement, every glance. She knew what it meant when warriors stood close during polite words. It meant the decision about trust had already been made, and not in her favor. The envoy's words stayed with Mara long after she left the command hall. She returned to her quarters, walking past the silent guards and the watching eyes of the crew. The walls of the Oravax felt closer now, the air heavier, each step carrying the weight of the decision she knew she must make. The envoy had not come to understand her, but to decide her fate. And if the decision was already leaning toward captivity, then there was only one path left open to her. Freedom was not something she would beg for, it was something she would take. That night, or what passed for night, on the ship, Mara sat on her bunk listening to the low hum of the engines and the faint clatter of distant machinery. She focused on the rhythm of the ship, learning the patterns of movement, the moments when footsteps passed, and the moments when the corridor outside fell silent. Humans had always survived by paying attention to the smallest details, by seeing the path no one else noticed. She waited until the shift changed when the guards outside her door would be distracted during the handover. She stood slowly and stretched her arms, her muscles alive with the steady pulse of her strange healing energy. Then she moved to the door. The lock was advanced, but she had been watching for days. She had seen the guard enter codes and learned the sequence of gestures. Her mind replayed the pattern as her fingers moved in perfect mimicry. The door slid open with a quiet hiss, and she stepped into the dim corridor. The nearest guard was speaking to his replacement, their voices low but relaxed. Neither saw her until she was already moving past them. The first reached out in surprise, but her elbow drove into his midsection. Not enough to kill, but enough to send him to the floor. The second turned, but she caught his wrist and twisted until he dropped his weapon. She did not keep it. Carrying a weapon would slow her down if the alarm sounded. She moved quickly through the service halls, avoiding the main passages where patrols would be heavier. The ship's layout was complex, but she had studied it in the quiet hours, learning where the maintenance shafts connected and which doors were rarely monitored. Her breathing stayed calm, her body adjusting to the strain, her wounds from the earlier trials now fully gone, as if they had never been there. She wondered if the Envoy's people had considered that the more they pushed her body, the more it learned to adapt, the stronger she became. Her goal was not just escape, but to reach the communications bay. She knew that if she could send a single broad signal into the deep channels, someone out there would hear it. Perhaps another human ship, perhaps a trader who would carry the message further. The truth about human biology would not remain locked in Vlar records. The universe would know, and in knowing, perhaps, she would no longer be a specimen, but a warning. She reached the comm bay door, but found it guarded by two of the Envoy's personal attendants, their robes marking them as ceremonial, but their stance revealing the training of soldiers. She could not simply walk past them. So she stepped into the shadows and waited, timing her move with the sound of a passing cargo drone. When the machine rolled by, she stepped out behind it, using its bulk to block her from their line of sight until she was almost upon them. Then she struck fast, a sharp kick to one knee and a strike to the other's temple. They fell without a sound. She pulled them out of sight before entering the bay. Inside the room, the glow of monitors lit the dark, streams of data running across the screens. She moved to the central console and began to work. The Vlar systems were alien, but her training with human relay tech gave her enough understanding to bypass the local encryption. The signal she sent was raw and unrefined, a burst of coordinates, data on her trials, and a single message in human standard script saying they cannot control what they do not understand. Once it was sent, she knew it could never be pulled back. The alarm sounded moments later, the lights in the corridor turning red, the ship's voice calling for security to seal sections. Mara ran, her feet carrying her toward the hangar where small craft were docked. She could hear the thudding steps of pursuit behind her, the sharp hiss of energy weapons firing, bolts of light striking the walls around her. One grazed her shoulder, burning the flesh. Yet even as the pain flared, she felt the wound closing, the skin sealing in moments, the heat fading, as if it had never been there. She reached the hangar doors and found them closing, the heavy bulkheads grinding down. She pushed harder, sprinting through the narrowing gap just as it shut behind her. Inside the hangar, several technicians looked up in shock. She moved past them without a word, heading for the smallest craft, one that looked fast and lightly armed. She climbed into the cockpit and began powering the engines. Behind her, the hangar doors opened again as security poured in, but the craft's systems came to life, the hum turning into a roar. She gripped the controls and launched forward. The force of the launch pressed her into the seat as the craft shot through the magnetic field and into open space, the stars stretching around her, alarms from the Auravax blaring in the comm channels demanding she return. She shut them off and set a course away from the Vlar system, the navigation computer warning her about fuel limits. She knew she would have to find a safe port soon, but for now distance was all that mattered. Back on the Auravax, the envoy stood in the hangar watching the shrinking trail of the stolen craft, their expression unreadable. Thivik approached and said that this would not end quietly. The envoy replied that it never could. Something like her would not remain hidden, and now the whole council would know that the human was not only beyond their control, but had chosen to run. Thivik said that perhaps the galaxy should be warned before they try to catch her. The envoy gave no answer. In the small craft, Mara leaned back in the seat, the stars endless before her, her body still humming with the aftershock of the escape. She knew that the signal she sent would spread, others would hear it, and somewhere humans would know that one of their own had survived in the heart of alien power and returned with proof of what they could do. She smiled faintly, not because the danger was over, but because it had only begun. And in that danger, there was freedom.